The wound bloomed on Lyra's shoulder at the exact instant Cassian ducked behind a fractured wall 27 kilometers away. Blood soaked the gray fabric of her jumpsuit, though no bullet had touched her. Cassian felt a phantom heat sear the same spot on his own body, and his pulse, no, their pulse, lurched, stuttered, found its rhythm again. Shouts echoed on both sides of the shattered city, orders barked by officers who believed themselves commanders of separate sovereign armies. None of them understood that somewhere beneath the rib cages of two 18-year-old soldiers, a single heart kept time for both. Once they had heard their mother call it the duet chamber. Late-night experiments in the Vanguard biological arsenal had shaped them into living symphonies. One set of ventricles divided in utero, two bodies strung together by quantum-tuned sinoatrial nodes, and a lattice of engineered nerves. Lyra and Cassian hadn't realized their difference when they were children. Only that if one swallowed ice water, the other tasted Arctic salt. And if one cried at a nightmare, the other woke up choking on the same tears. Then the Vanguard shattered into splinter factions, the Coalition and the Directorate, and the twins were snatched in opposite directions by generals eager to turn miracles into munitions. For a year they served as reluctant mascots. The Coalition told Cassian he was proof of human resilience. They wired him to monitors that broadcast every contraction of the shared heart across recruiting holos, claiming he was the pulse of the people. Meanwhile, the Directorate paraded Lyra along frontline infirmaries, promising that her altered physiology would ignite a renaissance in battlefield medicine, so long as the enemy was crushed first. All the while, the twins learned how to weaponize what the scientists had fused inside them. Each blow, each spark of agony, became clandestine Morse code. By the third month of separation, they had invented a private lexicon. A tightened diaphragm meant yes, a skipped beat meant no. Flutters along the left atrium spelled letters. Pain was punctuation, because pain could not be hidden from biometric sensors. The twins turned suffering into signal. A needle scratch on Lyra's forearm transmitted a dash. A self-inflicted knuckle crack from Cassian answered with a dot. Within weeks, they could whisper paragraphs across walls, across trenches, across entire grids of jamming satellites. The doctors saw only sympathetic anomalies and charted them on clipboards. The twins saw a rope thrown across a chasm. That rope grew taut the night each faction completed its superweapon. The Coalition unveiled the Helios Array, 12 orbital mirrors primed to bake Directorate cities with concentrated sunlight. The Directorate, not to be outdone, prepared the Abyssal Coil, an underground railgun capable of punching tungsten rods clear through the planet's crust into enemy command bunkers. Launching either would guarantee retaliation by the other. Launching both would melt glaciers and continents alike. Sitting in separate barracks, heart yawing between cages, Lyra and Cassian arrived at the same conclusion. Sabotage was no longer rebellion, it was survival. Cassian initiated the plan with 3 deliberate breaths. Inhale, hold, exhale, an old bedtime cadence they once shared in a single room. Lyra felt the pattern echoing under her sternum and replied by pressing her thumb into the torn skin of her shoulder. Pain, pause, pain, message received. Step 1 required relocation. Cassian volunteered for the Coalition's engineering corps, pleading that he could hear the machinery of destiny in his veins. The phrase sounded ludicrous, but propaganda officers loved poetry. Within 48 hours, he found himself shipped to the Helios command spire, a glass tooth jutting into perpetual dawn. Every floor hummed with solar algorithms. He memorized them while sweeping corridors. Lyra, for her part, feigned an epileptic episode, forcing Directorate physicians to move her from the parade circuit to a secure medical wing beneath the coil's firing cradle. There, fluorescent lights buzzed above cryogenic caverns where tungsten rods waited like harpoons. She cataloged security checkpoints, door codes, coolant line schematics. Each discovery pulsated across their shared myocardium. A hitch meant bulkhead. 2 rapid kicks meant failsafe. They had to be careful. When the shared heart dipped below 50 beats per minute, Directorate monitors flooded Lyra with stimulants. When it spiked above 130, Coalition doctors sedated Cassian. Testing the limits became its own reconnaissance. They learned that anything under 90 registered as calm, tattered 95 and above, combat arousal. Their perfect window for clandestine messages hovered at 93. Enough vigor to mask conversational bumps, not enough to trip alarms. They synchronized their breathing until 93 became their sacred number. On the eve of the Helios activation ceremony, Cassian stood on a steel balcony facing east. Stratospheric drones nudged the mirrors into alignment like choir conductors. Below, thousands of workers drunk on champagne sang anthems that hadn't existed 3 years earlier. Cassian stretched his arms over the railing, tapping one finger against the metal. 3 dots, a dash, 2 dots. Lyra answered with a clenched jaw that sent tremors through their chest. Dash, dot, dash, dash. The code translated to Helios firing tomorrow sunrise, coil firing tomorrow sunset. A single heartbeat held both truths. They had roughly 20 hours to collapse both devices. Cassian's half of the operation demanded silence rather than explosives. The Helios mirrors depended on microthrusters fueled by triiodine propellant. A fractional miscalculation would pivot a mirror by several degrees enough to miss a city and set fire to uninhabited deserts instead. Sabotage would therefore be statistical, almost invisible. He slipped into Navigation Bay 3 during shift change. Rotating holograms projected arc maneuvers like petals on a sunflower. Cassian approached the console, typed a maintenance code he'd overheard from a careless technician, and injected a single-character error in the guidance firmware. Line 4478, where minus became plus. 1 keystroke, a butterfly wing. He confirmed the checksum, wiped his prints, and exhaled, easing the heart rate back to 93. Lyra's half was louder. The abyssal coil required liquid nitrogen to keep its rails superconductive. Disrupt the coolant and the first electromagnetic surge would warp the barrel beyond repair. The tanks were housed behind a biometric door keyed to retinal scans. Lyra's irises, catalogued months ago, granted her access, but flagged an attendance console. She needed 60 seconds before guards descended. She palmed a stolen vial of polyacid-aided descaler used for cleaning turbines and hurled it against the primary nitrogen pipe. Frost gave way to steam. Alarms sang. She fled through an auxiliary vent, dodging incandescent plumes as uncooled rails cracked with a sound like gods breaking bones. Across the city's skeleton, Cassian's pulse galloped when he felt Lyra's adrenaline flaring through their fused organ. He whispered, slow, under his breath, knowing she would hear not the word but the intention, and tried to will their mutual rhythm back to the blessed 93 before technicians noticed. 30 seconds later, the number stabilized. The Helios control room remained oblivious. Its only hint of crisis was a tremor in the glass as distant munitions from Directorate territory exploded beneath the earth. Neither faction understood yet that their wonder weapons had failed, but both knew sabotage had occurred. Security clampdowns swept every facility, scrutinizing personnel files, interrogating sleepy operators, flagging statistical anomalies and biometrics. That was where the twins' shared heart betrayed them. Investigators compared logs. At 2:14 Coalition time, Cassian's pulse rose in sympathy with a Directorate explosion. At 2:47 Directorate time, Lyra's pulse spiked alongside a Helios diagnostic error. The data suggested impossible simultaneity. It suggested conspiracy. Cassian was the first arrested. Coalition MPs found him kneeling in the dormitory shower, suppressing waves of chest pain that were not his own. Lyra grappling with stun batons kilometers away. They shackled him to a gurney, jabbed electrodes into his neck. Every jolt rattled Lyra's body in her holding cell, prompting Directorate medics to administer countervoltage so her vitals would not flatline. Torture collapsed into feedback, a closed loop of cruelty bouncing between two regimes that never spoke to each other, yet unwittingly cooperated in causing maximum harm. After 7 hours, the factions realized they were torturing themselves. Interrogators compared intercepted telemetry, deciphered the physiological echoes, and concluded that combat had delivered them a prize more exotic than a spy. They had captured halves of a whole and might leverage that wholeness as blackmail. Coalition strategists drafted a communique. Return our citizen or we stop his heart. Directorate scribes penned an identical threat. Release our asset or we stop hers. Messages crossed digital seas, collided, and left both sides blinking at the mirror image of their own menace. The summit was arranged in the dust-glassed ruins of Meridian Plaza, once a marketplace of silk and spice, now a crater ringed by barricades. Two command tents faced each other like wary beasts across the scar. Between them, a makeshift medical pavilion housed the twins. IV drips, cardiographs, and 6 soldiers from each faction stood watch with rifles lowered, but safeties off. The twins lay on adjacent cots separated by 2 meters of neutral ground, close enough to see the tremor in each other's eyelids for the first time in a year. Lyra spoke first, throat ragged. "You cut your hair." Cassian smiled through dry lips. "You grew yours." Emotion threatened to drag their pulse past 93. Both swallowed it down. They needed clarity. Outside, negotiators argued semantics, prisoner exchange, neutral oversight, non-aggression pact. Inside, the twins reviewed sabotage results with a few blinks and twitches. Helios mirrors were drifting, too subtle for immediate detection. The coil's railgun coolant system lay in shards. Secondary arrays might be repaired within weeks. They needed a final measure, something irreversible. Their mother's voice haunted them. The duet chamber can withstand zero gravity, vacuum, even cryostasis. But it is exquisitely vulnerable to resonance. Back then she had been proud, disgusting theoretical limits the way architects admire cathedrals. Resonance, an external frequency matching pericardial harmonics, could overload the nanoscale pacemaker that managed the twins' joint rhythm. A sonic knife hidden in music. Cassian remembered Meridian Plaza's amphitheater, half submerged in rubble but still wired for commemorative broadcasts. Directorate and Coalition had rigged loudspeakers, so each could trumpet victory anthems at the other across the demilitarized gap. Currently they sat silent, awaiting the conclusion of talks. If those speakers could be tuned to the right frequency, the heart would not survive, nor, consequently, would the fragile ceasefire. Unless they could direct the outcome. They decided in less than a second. Because one heartbeat is not built for lengthy debate. They would choose their own residence, destroy the duet chamber, and leave both factions holding nothing but corpses and the prospect of mutual oblivion if war continued. Martyrdom as leverage for peace. First, they needed means. Lyra feigned a seizure, thrashing until a nurse bolted to stabilize her. She locked eyes with Cassian, who responded by jerking against his cuffs, jerking too in perfect synchronicity. Monitors wailed. 2 crews converged at once, momentarily tangled, Coalition blue sleeves bumping Directorate red insignias. In the confusion, Lyra snatched a duty tablet from a desk, slid it under her blanket, and typed blind. Cassian, feeling every tap as a flutter in their atria ... knew the code was uploading to the plaza's PA grid. 30 seconds later the tablet pinged confirmation. Frequency 186.1 Hz, volume 120 decibels, loop duration 70 seconds. The resonance threshold for pericardial tissue rupture was theoretically 118 decibels at that exact pitch. All that remained was activation. Cassian whispered, "Forgive me," though he wasn't sure whether to his sister or himself, and stiffened so violently that his shackles snapped the cot frame. Metal clanged, guards lifted rifles. At that same fraction of a moment, Lyra shoved the nurse aside and sprinted for the pavilion exit. Soldiers hesitated, unwilling to fire on a patient whose death might trigger the others. That hesitation was the fuse. Outside, sky burned lavender over broken marble columns. Lyra reached a junction box mounted on a fallen pillar where speaker cables clustered like veins. She slammed her fist onto a manual override and jammed the tablet's connector into a service port. The plaza erupted in a single note. A low, thrumming growl that crawled through concrete and bone alike. Cassian felt it first, a vibration tugging at his ribs. Alarms beeped as sensors spiked. Directorate surgeons shouted for ear protection. Coalition commanders demanded the sound be cut. But technicians searching for source wires found only coils already melted by overcurrent. The frequency bored into the duet chamber, setting its walls quivering like crystal under a soprano's high C. Lyra staggered, palms pressed against her sternum. They had calculated 70 seconds. Yet at 45 her vision tunneled. Across the tent threshold she saw Cassian arch, cords on his neck taut, but calmness radiated from him through the shared organ, washing her with gentler waves amid the maelstrom. Together they counted the beats. 93, 92, 89, slower, slower. Each decibel carved fissures in the biotech that had once bound them. Past the barricades, officers from both factions realized too late that the heart they coveted was dissolving into silence. They screamed at sound crews, at aides, at each other. Some fired pistols into the air as though bullets could puncture the invisible note. The resonance simply swallowed the noise. 68 seconds. Crack. Cassian's lungs filled with metallic warmth. Lyra tasted the same iron on her tongue. She knelt, steadying herself against debris, and forced her eyes to find her brothers across the distance. He mouthed, "We're free." She answered by touching 2 fingers to her lips, then to her chest. The gesture traveled directly into his own breastbone. 70 seconds. The speakers died. Silence swept Meridian Plaza, deeper than any ceasefire. Monitors flatlined. In the gap between cots, physicians from both factions dropped their instruments and simply stared, comprehending the enormity of what had slipped from their grasp. Peace or annihilation would follow, depending on whether they chose to honor the twins' final lesson. Months passed before historians agreed on what happened next. Some wrote that the Coalition and Directorate, sobered by the spectacle, dismantled their superweapons and signed accords to share technology responsibly. Others insisted that it was exhaustion and logistical collapse, not morality, that ended the war. But all accounts converge on a simple fact: neither Helios nor the Abyssal Coil ever fired. The twin Sabotage held. As for Lyra and Cassian, they were buried in the same coffin, an empty chamber for a vanished heart. The tombstone bore no emblems, only a line etched in 2 languages: beat once, beat always. Pilgrims still press their ears against the stone, swear they can hear a faint rhythm, then realize it is only their own pulse answering the echo of a story, one about shared pain, synchronized rebellion, and the final note that rewrote the war. Years later, children of both former factions play together in Meridian's rebuilt amphitheater. They stamp their feet on marble, experimenting with acoustics, unaware of the frequency that once severed a war. Under the archway stands a statue of twins, back to back, palms touching. Tour guides explain that the figures represent unity after division. They rarely mention that unity was forged by genetic tampering, honed by suffering, and sealed by the deliberate shattering of a single human heartbeat spanning 2 bodies. Perhaps it is kinder that way. Yet at dusk, when the amphitheater lights flicker on and wind whistles through broken pillars still unrepaired by design, some adults pause, feel a soreness below their sternums, and remember that every piece worth keeping has its resonance point. A frequency where power bends, where one heart can become many.